Hey everybody, it's Sunday night and we're going to have a look at my rescaped native tank. I added this huge piece of wood and we've done a lot of little other odds and ends that we'll get into as we go over there and start looking at it in more detail. But to really take in the difference of what it looked like before versus now, you really need to see kind of the whole tank. So I like it, but it's not exactly what I was thinking of when I thought about rescaping the tank. It's probably not done, mainly because this big piece of wood right here is very buoyant right now, and I've got it wedged in there and rocks piled on top of it and everything else trying to hold it down. So once it soaks up some water and becomes a little more saturated, then we should probably be able to move it into a little slightly more horizontal position rather than sticking quite so upright at the moment. And I'll show you exactly what I mean. For one thing, we've got this rock right there. We've also got this really big rock down here, and that rock is actually stuck into that hollowed out log and goes way down here. It was one of the really big rocks that was leaning up against, had all that series of rocks. And so when I pulled it out, I'm glad I did, because you get a really good look at the roots of the Anubias that's been growing in there and attaching to the rocks over the last year or two. But that huge rock is in there, wedged it, holding it down. So over time we'll be able to move that out and open this whole area up, and you'll be able to get a lot more activity with the fish swimming around in there. And yes, I have seen the fish swimming in and out of there, and it's really awesome looking. The real thing is this rock under here that you really can't see. It's a sideways, it's a flat rock, and I've got it wedged down onto the piece of wood and then up against this center crossbar. So there's there's pressure pushing up on that crossbar. That wood is really trying to float right now, but that rock is jammed in there and holding it down, in addition to those other two rocks that are piled on top just to add weight to it. This is holding this end down. The whole end would be coming up if it wasn't for that big piece right in there. So over time, as I said, we can maybe get this whole thing to sort of slide down this way a little more, and hopefully maybe roll it a little bit so we can look down into that opening. It does indeed go all the way up and out, but I did take a few bits of plant. I got a water sprite here, and I've got this Anubias. There was a few holes that went through the side. It was like a series of holes that went down into the main body, and small fish, like really small fish, guppy-sized fish, would have been able to slip in and out of there. So I wasn't too worried about the fish activity through that. And so what I wound up doing was just tucking those little plants down in there and getting them to hopefully root in and start growing on the inside, and then the plant will grow up and out. It's already starting to get some growth right here. I've got another one of those big Anubias tucked in sort of between the rock and the piece of wood, so that's not going to stay as we wind up moving the piece of wood over time. That piece of Anubias is probably temporary. And the way I've got this set up right now, I'm not exactly sure. What I did was I took the spray bar off, so it's just that. And then I propped it up on a piece of wood, so instead of hanging on the back of the tank, it's up and over that piece of wood to elevate it. And then I just have it sort of hitting all that stuff, and it gives you the effect of a nice little babbling spring flowing into the tank. If you don't pay too much attention, you get just at the right angle, you can't really even see the intake there, or inflow, I should say. And so it gives you that nice little look. I also like the sound of that. It sounds like a little trickling stream down here in the basement, in addition to my waterfall. So I also took a bunch of creeping Jenny from one of my customers. He still had some growing in his yard, and I just draped it over here. So the roots are going down into this end, and they're not very far in. And then the rest of the plant is just sort of lying across the water, and we're going to wait and find out what happens with that. I don't exactly know what I want to do with these crossbars yet, and whether I want to put like boxes. Someone suggested like window boxes. I could do something like that, or I'm hoping I can just get plants to sort of grow up and over them. And like in this case, I'm kind of using the current's trying to get the water sprite to go that way. You can see the roots are sort of trailing off to the left there. But with it tucked in like this and it continues to grow, we might get a nice big bushy water sprite growing up right out of here. This big piece of wood right here was down on the bottom, and well, it was sort of up and over everything, and it has a bunch of Java attached to it. So when I pulled that out, I didn't want to get rid of it because it's got so much Java already attached to it, and that will, in short order, that will be growing up and out of the water too, I'm hoping. I treated the tank with ChemiClean, and that did a great job getting it cleaned up. If you'll remember, this piece of wood here was covered in all that nasty cyanobacteria, and you can see how dead it is now. Everything in there is nice and cleaned up and looking good. Even this piece of wood down here that had all that cyanobacteria growing on it, that's all cleaned up and looking good. I've got some water sprite and a few other little odds and ends just sort of tucked into this corner. That's all free floating, but we're going to wait and see what happens so that I can get some surface vegetation going on without blocking too much of the light. I want as much open water as possible while still having, you know, plants growing up and out of the tank. So I was getting pearling in this tank prior to me treating it for the cyanobacteria and just the off-walks and all that sort of grunge in general. And when I say grunge in general, I'll give you an idea what I'm talking about. If you look at this tank, you see all that stuff on the glass right there? That grungy stuff is not bad, and it's not a sign of an unhealthy tank or anything, but it is stuff that is living and growing, and the cyanobacteria treatment will kill that too and get everything in the tank looking nice and clean. So again, it's not a bad idea to just give your tank a cleaning once in a while using that. I actually do that in quite a few of my tanks as they get kind of dirty and grungy. So I did that, and now I'm not getting any more pearling. And that just confirms what I thought in the beginning, was that I was getting pearling from the cyanobacteria, not from my macro plants, you know, my larger plants in here, the Java fern, the Anubias, and all that kind of stuff. The reason being is these plants grow fairly slowly, even with this amount of light on them. They're not going to grow fast enough and photosynthesize rapidly enough to produce too much oxygen that's going to give us pearling. The bubbles that you see collecting in there, you know, on the bottom side of everything, those are just the bubbles that are collecting. What I was getting was true pearling, but it was coming from the cyanobacteria because that stuff grows crazy fast, and underneath all this light, that's what it was doing. It was growing so fast that it was generating so much oxygen into the water that it was actually saturating the tank with oxygen. A lot of people think that pearling plant is a result of high levels of CO2, when in fact pearling is a result of high levels of oxygen in your water. The water becomes saturated with oxygen and can't hold anymore, and then the oxygen that's being produced by the plants can't go anywhere, and it winds up just collecting until you see visible bubbles, and those bubbles get bigger and bigger until they're enough to, you know, buoyant enough to detach and float to the surface. So pearling is a result of a well oxygenated tank, more so than anything. But you need really, really vigorous growth in order to generate the pearling, and I'm just not going to get that kind of growth with these plants under these circumstances. But you can get that kind of growth with the cyanobacteria and everything, and that's what I was getting. So now that I've cleaned that out and all the cyanobacteria has been killed off, I get no more pearling. So there you go. That's just a preliminary look. As I said, it's a pretty good sized piece of wood. We can come down here, I guess, and have a look lengthwise up the tank. I'll look behind the tank and see if we're missing any more minnows. I've already lost, I don't know, 6 or 8 minnows from jumping. Alright everybody, there's your first look at my new redesigned native tank. Now again, it's probably going to change somewhat over time, but at least you get a pretty good idea of what it looks like with this giant piece of wood in there, and you get a better feel for what that looks like in the tank. So there you go. Thanks for watching. Make sure you're subscribed, And don't forget, of course, this is my 125 gallon native tank. So thanks again. See you real soon in the next one.